Hi, this is Andrew Schwartz here with our first Unity tutorial. And in this tutorial, we're going to cover a lot of the very basic beginner steps involved with Unity. Navigating around the Unity interface, creating some game objects, importing packages, and kind of testing out um, our progress. If all that sounds complicated to you, don't worry. I'm going to try my best to explain everything as uh, simply and as coherently as possible. So I have a lot of stuff in here. This is a project that I've been working on, and I'm actually not going to use it. We're going to start from scratch, and I wanted to demonstrate to you how to start from scratch. We're going to go up here to File. We're going to go to New Project. And if you're just opening up Unity for the first time, you're going to see something like this. You won't see this big window like I have. And you're going to see this location here. This is where you want to, where your project will save on your desktop. I'm going to say just the new Unity project like that. And then down here, you're going to see all these packages that you might be able to import if you want to start. If you know if you know, say, oh, I'm going to have particle effects in my game, then you can click this and you'll have Unity's basic particles imported already. We're not going to import anything of that nature, so leave all the stuff unchecked. And then down here it says set up defaults. You can set them up for 3D or 2D. Really, you don't have to worry about this all that much. I'm setting up for 3D and I'm going to stay in 3D. Over here, you can open a project if you have one already. Obviously, I'm not going to open up a new one. I'm just going to create one. So we hit create, and it takes us a minute. And here we are. You probably aren't going to have something that looks like this. You might have something that looks more like this. I really don't like this interface. I think it's really ugly and it doesn't help me work. So I like the first thing to do is kind of change my interface to 2x3. And we can see this. And this is more along the lines of what I like to work with. I also like to go in here, right click on the project window, and then click one column layout here. So now I can see what I'm doing a little bit more effectively. The first thing that I want to point out is this window up here. This is called the editor window. And inside the editor window, we make all our changes to our game, right? Now down here, this blue screen is called the game window. And this is what we will actually see in the game. So if I were to go up here to game object and create something, let's say a simple cube, you can see it popped up in the game window. And even though our views are very different over here, we can kind of see this cube's kind of floating around somewhere out here. But in the game window, we can see what it would look like with our camera. Okay? Now, the first thing that I like to do whenever I create a game object, which we just demonstrated how to do, is go over here to its transform positions and set these all to 0. X, Y, and Z in the position. Always, first thing I do is set those to 0. And what that does is it kind of zeroes out the object, so to speak, and places it dead center in the middle of our scene here. Okay? And the reason why I do that is because when you start making a lot of objects and you don't put them in the middle of everything, they kind of get cluttered and you get very confused later on. So I go ahead and do that right first thing so that I know where everything is. And I very much recommend that you start off doing that and get in the habit of changing the transforms on all your objects to 0 right away. So we have this simple box, and it's not really going to do anything. It's just a box that's hanging out here. And the first thing that I kind of want to call to our attention is physics. So what if we want that box to fall? I can go over here, clicking on the box, as you can see, by holding down here. I can give it a component. So let's say physics, rigid body. And now, when I press this play button up here, our box falls. pretty cool, right? If I don't want the box to fall anymore, I can right-click on the rigid body and select Remove Component with the box selected. Uh, if I want to kind of create sort of a space for the box to hang out in, or if I want to turn the box into something else, I can do that a couple of different ways. Up here, we have these things called position, rotation, and scale. And we can change the numbers. Position 2, as you can see, moves our box over a little bit. We set it back to 0. Doesn't do much. If we change the rotation, say to 45, as you can see, our box has rotated a little bit. And it snaps back. We can also kind of more visually adjust these elements with this gizmo here, right? I can drag these arrows to move our box along each of the axes. I can also hold one of these cubes, one of these sides, to kind of move the box along 2 or more axes. And if I click right in the middle, I can kind of move it freely. I'm going to reset all this to 0. I want you guys to really get in the habit of doing that. It's very important. I can also, by clicking up here, change the gizmo to a rotation gizmo. And I can kind of rotate this guy as I see fit. Again, resetting it to 0 afterwards. And then lastly, I can change the scale on my box with these gizmos in here. I can also uniform scale by holding the box in the middle, kind of the gray cube in the center. Now, if I wanted to change these to 0, the box would disappear. So something you should kind of keep in mind is that a scale of 0 is nothing. Resetting the scale to 1, however, brings our box back at the smallest, or at its default size. Now, I'm going to create a little plane on which to walk around. And the way I'm going to do that is by kind of rescaling our box along the X and Z axes. And you can see as I click and drag along these 2 planes, the numbers in the inspector window will change to kind of reflect that. So I like even numbers, so I'm going to change my scales to 25, 1, and 25, and that creates what looks like a really nice big plane to kind of mess around in. Now in the editor window, I'm going to demonstrate navigating around, because you can see that I've kind of been doing that, and I want you guys to understand how I've been moving around in the editor window. There are a number of different ways you can navigate. Using the mouse, I can click the left or the middle mouse button, and you can see I have this, it brings up this hand. And then I can drag my mouse left and right, up or down, to move around in that way. I can also use the mouse wheel to scroll in and out, which zooms me in and out. I can also use the arrow keys to move my view around, kind of like you would control a first-person shooter. I can hold shift and kind of warp, get a much faster movement going on there as well. And if at any point I get really lost like this and have no idea where I am, I can go over here to the hierarchy panel and double click and zoom right back in to where I was, which is just a little nifty trick that I think you guys should be aware of. So now we have this little plane, and maybe I want to kind of light it up so I can see what's going on. I can create a light by going to Gameobject, Create Other, Point Light. And again, I want that point light right in the middle of everything, so I know exactly where it is. And then I'll just drag it up a little bit, and you can see kind of a light that shows off, that appears in the game, and everything else, kind of the unlit area has now darkened to reflect the fact that now there is light in the game. I can manipulate the size of the light and the area that the light affects by clicking and dragging in these nifty little boxes here. Um, I can also change the color of the light by clicking here. Maybe a slightly more yellow light might be nice. I think I'm going to go for that. Um, I can influence the range more abruptly by simply changing the number in the inspector window. Then there's a lot of other manipulating, or there are a lot of other factors here which I can manipulate, but I'm not going to go into those right now. They're a little more complicated than we need to know for now. Just for now, understand that when I create an object, like a point light, it appears in the hierarchy. I can manipulate it using the inspector panel. Okay? Now, this is all well and good, but I'd like to actually physically walk around in the game while we're playing it. And in order to do that, I need a character controller. Unity, thankfully, has default character controllers that we can use to play around with, but I can't access them without importing a package. To import a package, we go to Assets up here and import package. And now we see all these Unity default packages that we can import and play around with. I'm going to click on character controllers right now. We get this window, which has a bunch of all the elements of a character controller in here. So we have two different ones, third person and first person. We have the program, the scripts that allow them to work, and then some materials for the third person controller. I'm going to import everything and wait for our package to import. And now, in our project panel over here, we have a new folder called Standard Assets. Inside that folder is a folder called Character Controllers, and inside there, we have two prefabs called Third Person Controller and First Person Controller. I'm going to bring in the First Person Controller, drag and drop, click on them in the Hierarchy panel. The difference between the Hierarchy panel and the Project panel, by the way, sorry about that. As I was saying, the difference between the hierarchy panel and the project panel is that the project panel incorporates everything that is in the game, everything that you can bring into the game. The hierarchy panel incorporates everything that is in the scene currently. Okay, so I could bring a third-person controller in, but I don't want to. That's why there's no third person in the hierarchy panel, but there is one in the project panel. Moving on, since I just brought my first person controller in, the first thing I'm going to do is zero out its position. And now I'm going to drag the first person controller up just a little bit, zoom in, so that he's kind of hovering outside of our world. Now we have our first problem. We have two cameras in our scene, a main camera here and a main camera here. I don't want more than one main camera in the scene because that can cause gameplay problems later on and we can run into bugs. I obviously need to delete one of them, and the first person controller that I'm going to or the camera that I'm going to delete is this main camera that is outside of the first person controller. This guy we don't need, so I'm going to hit delete. Now when I press play, you can see down here in the game window that I can walk around as a first person controller, which is pretty sweet. And if you look in the editor window, you can see my first person controller kind of moving around a little bit to reflect that. So, we've covered a lot so far. We've covered game objects, creating some of them. We've covered bringing in packages. We've covered gizmos and navigating around in the editor window, and then creating lights as well. So that's a whole lot to digest at once. So I'm going to leave you off here for now. And in our next video, we're going to talk more about creating different objects. We're going to talk about giving them physics, and maybe we might do a little bit of programming.